My friend is marrying my mother and wants me to be his best man. Don't forget to like the video before we continue. I never thought I'd be in this situation. I always imagined my mom would find someone she loved, and I'd be the proud son, welcoming a new father into the family. But instead, I'm standing here trying to figure out how to process the fact that my best friend, Ethan, is marrying my mom. Yeah, you read that right. Ethan is 26. I'm 25. And my mom? She's 45. She's been a widow for most of my life. My dad passed away when I was a kid. Ever since then, it's just been me and her. I didn't mind. I loved our little family unit, even though I knew she probably felt lonely at times. But after all these years, she never looked at anyone else. She was never interested in dating, not even once. And that was fine with me. I respected it. She always told me she was too busy taking care of me, and I was okay with that. But now Ethan, my best friend, is swooping in and, in his words, taking care of her. That's when things went south. It started with a casual conversation that I wish I could erase from my memory. One night, out of the blue, Ethan called me, and I could tell something was off by the tone in his voice. "Hey man, we need to talk," he said, sounding way too serious for a Tuesday evening. "About what?" I asked, thinking it was some random thing like him getting a new job or moving to a new place. "About your mom," he said, and immediately my stomach dropped. It was the way he said it, like he'd been thinking about this for a while. "I'm marrying her, bro," he added, and I almost dropped my phone. At first, I thought it was a joke. Ethan's always been the prankster, the guy who's full of jokes, but this didn't sound like one. My first instinct was to laugh it off, but when I didn't, Ethan kept going. "I'm serious. I want you to be my best man. We're getting married." My brain couldn't process it. Ethan, who I've known since we were kids, who I'd call my brother, is marrying my mom? My mind was racing, and I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. What the hell? After a long pause, I finally spoke. "Why? Why her?" He didn't hesitate. "She's been through a lot, man. She deserves someone who's going to treat her right. And I think I could be that person." At that moment, I wanted to scream. I hated everything about this. I hated the idea of Ethan marrying her. I hated how he didn't even seem to get it, how it wasn't about taking care of her, but more about his own desire for her. It wasn't love. It was lust. And I knew it. But here I was, stuck in the middle of this mess. I couldn't tell him how much I hated the idea, even though I did. I couldn't make him change his mind. After all, my mom was a grown woman, and if she was okay with it, who was I to stop her? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a normal relationship. It was something off. I knew Ethan's history with women. He had a habit of getting with people he couldn't have, people who were forbidden or out of reach. This wasn't a fairy tale, and my mom was not some prize to be won. She deserved someone who genuinely cared for her, not some guy who was more interested in her, because she was the one he couldn't have. But despite all of this, I agreed to go along with it. I told myself that maybe this was just a phase. Maybe I was overreacting. That's how I ended up in a suit, standing at the altar, waiting for my mom to walk down the aisle, preparing to be Ethan's best man. I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. How was I supposed to stand there and pretend like everything was okay? My mom was so happy, her face glowing as she walked down the aisle in her white dress. She had that look in her eyes, the look of someone who thought they were getting a second chance at love. It was painful to watch. And then there was Ethan, standing there like this was his moment of glory. His grin was too wide, too eager. His eyes lingered on my mom a little too long for my liking. I knew that look. It wasn't about loving her, it was about possessing her. As the ceremony began, I felt like an outsider in my own family. It felt like my mom was slipping away, like she was leaving me behind for someone I didn't trust. The vows were exchanged, the rings were placed on fingers, and my heart grew heavier with every second. I didn't know how to handle this. I didn't know how to fix it. I felt helpless. The most painful part of it all was when they asked me to give a speech. Ethan, in his usual bold fashion, had insisted that I be his best man. And like an idiot, I agreed. But what could I say? How could I possibly congratulate him on something I knew was so wrong? How could I fake a smile and stand there like everything was fine? When it came time for my speech, I knew it wasn't going to be the usual here's to the happy couple kind of speech. I had to say something that made sense of all of this. I didn't even care that it would make the room uncomfortable. I took the microphone in my hand, cleared my throat, and then I let it rip. Here we are, I started looking between my mom and Ethan, the happy couple. Or maybe not so happy? Honestly, I don't know how to even start. Ethan, you've been my best friend for years, but this? I motioned toward them. This is wrong. You're marrying my mom, and I can't sit here and pretend like everything's fine. It's not. I don't trust you with her, and I don't think you're doing this for the right reasons. I could see my mom's face go pale and Ethan's jaw clenched. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I don't know what you see in her, Ethan, I continued. But it feels like you're more interested in the idea of having her than actually loving her. The room was silent. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and Ethan's face was burning with anger. But I didn't care. I had to say it. By the time I finished, the mood in the room had completely shifted. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the place. I didn't care. I wasn't going to lie. I wasn't going to pretend. I walked away from the stage, not looking back, as the sound of murmurs filled the air. After the speech, everything just shattered. It was like I'd thrown a grenade into the middle of a quiet dinner party, except the pieces were the people I loved most. My mom, who I thought I'd protected all my life, looked at me like I'd betrayed her. Ethan, the guy who had been my closest friend, was seething with anger. But none of it hit me as hard as the look on my mom's face. She was crying, and not just a little tear trickling down her cheek. Her whole face was crumpled and hurt. When the ceremony ended, I thought I might collapse from the tension. Guests were murmuring as they left, some offering awkward smiles, others just avoiding eye contact altogether. But my mom, she didn't say a word to me. She just grabbed her bouquet and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Ethan, on the other hand, wasted no time. The moment the last of the guests had left, he was in my face, his nostrils flaring, his eyes blazing with frustration. "What the hell was that?" he snapped, barely keeping his voice down. I felt a rush of anger rise up in me. "I think you know exactly what that was." "No," he growled, stepping closer. "I don't think I do. Do you even care about her? About me?" I didn't want to get into it. I didn't want to fight. But it was too late. The words were already pouring out of me. "I care about her more than you do," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You don't love her, Ethan. You're just trying to get something out of this. You've always been like that, hopping from one person to the next, looking for someone you can control. My mom deserves more than that. She deserves someone who isn't trying to win her." He stepped back, hands clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. I'd seen him angry before, but never like this. But he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke more quietly, though his voice was still laced with anger. "You think I'm just some kind of predator? That's not it. You don't understand, and you never will. I'm doing this because I care about her. I want to build a life with her." I shook my head, disbelieving. "No, you don't. You're using her. And now you're using me too. I don't even know who you are anymore." We stood there, staring at each other in the aftermath of that conversation, neither of us willing to back down. But the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could tell that even though Ethan didn't want to admit it, part of him knew I was right. The rest of the evening was a blur. My mom refused to talk to me, and every time I tried to approach her, she would either walk away or give me a cold. I need space. I knew she was hurt, but I wasn't about to apologize for what I'd said. Not when I knew I was right. At some point, I found myself sitting outside the venue, alone. The sky had turned dark, and I felt like everything in my life had gone dark with it. The sound of muffled laughter and clinking glasses floated out from the reception hall, but it felt like a world away. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my thoughts, but eventually, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. "We need to talk." My heart sank. I knew this wasn't going to end well. I texted back, "I don't think there's anything left to talk about." His reply came almost immediately. "Trust me, there is." So, I made my way back inside, more out of a sense of obligation than anything else. I didn't want to go back to that mess, but I knew it wasn't over yet. Ethan cornered me in a small side room near the exit, and the look on his face said everything. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Look, I get it," he said, his voice quieter now. "You're pissed off, and I deserve that. But you need to understand something. This wasn't easy for me either." I crossed my arms, my anger flaring again. "Really? Because it doesn't look like you're struggling." "You don't get it, man," he said, his tone growing more desperate. "She's not just anyone to me. She's different. I've never felt this way about anyone. Not like this. But I didn't want to hurt you. That's the last thing I wanted." I stared at him, trying to make sense of his words, but all I could feel was the bitterness rising in my chest. "You think this is about me? This is about my mom, not you. You want her, and it's sick. You're too young for her, and you're not capable of loving her the way she needs." I saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes, but it didn't soften his resolve. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I'm going to marry her, and you're going to have to accept that." I felt my hands clench into fists. I didn't want to hear this. Not from him. Not after everything that had happened. But somehow, I knew he wasn't going to change his mind. "Fine," I said, my voice cold and final. "But don't think for a second that I'll be part of it. I'm done with this. I'll never accept you two together." And with that, I walked out. The days after the wedding were a haze. It was like nothing was real anymore. Ethan and my mom were married. And though I knew I'd had a hand in ruining the happiness of that day, it wasn't enough. I hated it, every second of it. But somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed more. I needed justice, more than what I had given them in that speech. I hated myself for even considering it, but the idea stuck. A few days after the wedding, I found myself texting Ethan's mom. It wasn't something I had planned, at least not consciously, but the idea of revenge was too tempting to ignore. I wanted him to feel what I was feeling, the way he had taken my mom away from me, how he'd replaced my father with a man I couldn't respect. So, I messaged her. "Hey, how are you doing?" I immediately regretted it after sending. What the hell was I doing? Was I really about to use her for revenge? I didn't know what I expected. An immediate conversation, maybe? Or her telling me off. But what came next surprised me. She responded quickly. "I'm good, just thinking about everything. It's been a crazy time for all of us." We started talking more. At first just the usual small talk. And then out of nowhere, she dropped the bomb. "You know," she said, "I always thought Ethan could do better. I thought it was strange how quickly he rushed into marrying your mom, but it's his decision. I just hope he knows what he's doing." I was taken aback. I thought about what I'd heard and remembered the way Ethan had acted in the days leading up to the wedding. The lust in his eyes, the way he looked at her. It wasn't love, it was infatuation, obsession. My mom had been a trophy to him. And here I was, talking to his mom, finding that she wasn't exactly thrilled about the marriage either. It felt wrong, like everything was wrong. But there was a dark satisfaction in this. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, but I wanted Ethan to regret what he'd done. And, in my twisted way, I figured that the only way to make him feel something was by doing the same thing he'd done to me. Using someone close to him. As the days passed, our conversations grew more frequent. Ethan's mom and I would talk late into the night. I'd complain about how everything had changed since the wedding, how awkward it was seeing Ethan and my mom together. She would listen, nodding along, offering kind words, but also subtly making it clear that she wasn't thrilled either. It was almost like we were partners in some secret rebellion, united by a mutual disdain for the marriage. One evening, I pushed the boundaries. I knew it was wrong, but the desire to make Ethan suffer clouded my judgment. "I don't know," I said, trying to sound innocent but also testing the waters. "It just feels so off. I mean, seeing my mom with someone so much younger, it's just strange, you know." She hesitated for a moment before responding. "I get it. But I think it's more about what she wants, not what we think. She's had a tough life." I could feel her hesitation, but there was something in her words that made me feel like we were on the same page. This wasn't about right or wrong anymore. This was about revenge. "Yeah," I said, "but if she's not getting what she needs from him, it's not going to end well. I don't think he's capable of truly loving her." There was a long silence, and then, finally she replied, "Maybe not. But you know, I'm sure there's someone out there who could treat her better." My heart skipped a beat. Was I hearing this right? She was agreeing with me, in some twisted way? Was I actually going to take this to the next level? That night, I made a decision. I texted her back. What if I could be that someone? And there it was. I had crossed a line, but I didn't care. In my mind, it was all about getting back at Ethan. I didn't even know if I liked her. Hell, I wasn't even sure I wanted to like her. But I was angry, and the anger needed a target. I wasn't even sure if she felt the same way, but the fact that she didn't immediately shut me down was all the confirmation I needed. To my surprise, she didn't reject me. Instead, she said, "Let's meet tomorrow, maybe talk things through." When we met the next day, it was like everything had become a game. I didn't feel any real connection to her, not like I thought I would. It wasn't about her at all. It was about Ethan. It was about making him regret everything he'd done. We talked for a while, exchanged pleasantries, and slowly the conversation steered into dangerous territory. "You know, I think you've always had a soft spot for me," she said with a teasing smile. I laughed nervously, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. "Yeah, I guess I've always admired you. You've been through a lot." She smiled softly, leaning in closer. "You're sweet." But in that moment, something shifted. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I'd get. Instead, I felt disgusted. I was doing this for all the wrong reasons. I wasn't looking at her as a person. I was using her to hurt Ethan. And that made me feel worse than anything. I could tell she was still trying to keep things light, trying to play along with whatever game we were playing. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my chest. This wasn't who I was. And what was worse, it wasn't who she was either. I ended up leaving the meeting early, feeling more conflicted than ever. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face, the way he had looked at me when I'd ruined his wedding day. And now I had to live with the fact that I'd dragged his mom into my mess, into this twisted game of revenge. What was I becoming? In the weeks that followed, I found myself caught in a battle I wasn't prepared for. I had walked down a road I didn't recognize, one paved with resentment and a twisted desire for revenge. But the more I lingered in this dark place, the more I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel vindicated. The awkward dinner meetings with Ethan's mom, my temporary revenge partner, hadn't brought me the relief I thought they would. In fact, they made me feel worse. I'd spent time with her, talked about things that shouldn't have mattered, all to get back at Ethan. But in the end, what I realized was simple. I didn't care about her. I didn't care about any of this. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to achieve anymore. At first, I had told myself it was about making Ethan regret everything. But now, with every passing day, it felt more like I was hurting myself. And the worst part? I couldn't undo any of it. The speech I'd given at the wedding, the message I'd sent Ethan's mom, they were all just part of a chain reaction that had spiraled out of control. The first time I saw Ethan after the wedding, he didn't say much. He looked at me like I was some kind of stranger, a person he didn't even recognize. There was a coolness between us now, an unspoken understanding that things had changed irreparably. And I hated it, but more than that, I hated myself for making it happen. I tried talking to my mom a few times, but she didn't want to listen. She was still hurting from the wedding day, hurt from me, from Ethan, from everything. And I realized that the damage I'd done wasn't just to Ethan. It was to my own family. My mom, who had never truly gotten over my dad's death, was left to deal with a broken heart again. She hadn't asked for any of this. And me? I had only made it worse. The tension in our house was unbearable. Every time I came home, it felt like I was walking into a war zone. My mom would look at me with disappointment, and Ethan would look at me with anger, as if everything that had happened was my fault. And maybe, in some twisted way, it was. But I was tired of carrying the weight. I didn't want to be part of their life anymore, not in this toxic, broken way. So, one evening, I made a decision. I packed a bag. Not a huge one, just a small duffel with the essentials. I couldn't bear to stay in that house any longer, not after everything that had happened. I walked into the kitchen, where my mom was sitting, staring at the wall, lost in thought. She didn't look up when I walked in. She didn't even acknowledge my presence. "Mom," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "I'm leaving." She didn't react at first. Then, slowly, she looked up, her eyes cold and empty. "Leaving? Where are you going?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I just can't be here anymore. I need space for me." She looked at me for a long moment, and in that silence, I realized that I had just broken whatever fragile bond we had left. There was no fixing it now. I had hurt her, and no apology could make it right. "I understand," she whispered finally, but it wasn't the answer I had hoped for. It was a resignation, a surrender, and somehow, that hurt more than anything else. And just like that, I left. I walked out of the door, leaving behind a life that had become nothing but pain. My mom, my friend, my home, it was all gone, and for once I didn't feel the need to hold on to it. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I wasn't going to find it here. Not in this house, not in this family. I didn't return for any holidays. I didn't go to any family reunions. It wasn't because I didn't miss them, it wasn't that simple. It was because I had made a decision, and I couldn't go back on it. They weren't my family anymore, not the way they had been. Ethan and my mom were something I couldn't be a part of, and I didn't want to keep pretending I could be. Years went by, and sometimes I would think about them. I'd think about what could have been, about how I could have made different choices. But deep down, I knew that what I had done was for the best, for all of us. It was better to let go than to keep forcing myself into a life that wasn't mine. I had learned the hard way that revenge never brings the peace you think it will. It only leaves you hollow. The truth was, I didn't need to get back at Ethan. I didn't need to make him suffer. What I needed was to step away, to let go of the past and find my own way. So I did. I walked away from it all, family, friends, everything that had once been so important. And in the end, maybe that was the real revenge. Walking away with my head held high, knowing that I had finally chosen myself. The life I had once been so angry about was nothing but a distant memory. What remained was just me, on my own, living the life I had earned, without the baggage of a family I could no longer be a part of. And that's how it ended. It wasn't a dramatic conclusion, no big showdown or a moment of triumphant justice. It was just a decision. To leave. To stop fighting a battle I couldn't win. To start over. I never looked back. And somehow, I think that was the only real answer. Well, this is it, a pretty wild story. If you enjoyed the story, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button.